We're going to continue with on repaying debts of gratitude, starting on page 704, the last paragraph on the first column. But does everybody remember what we kind of went through last week as the next section? We've gone through like 2 sections of this Gosho so far, which is quite long and quite deep and profound. It's basically telling you the history of the correct teaching.
Yes.
And the history of Buddhist thought in terms of how it migrated from India to China and ultimately to Japan. Does everybody remember where we were? Last week we were talking about Tentai. We were talking about the great debate that he had that led everybody in China to understand that the Lotus Sutra was superior. But at that point in time, I think it was Dharma characteristics or something like that in True Word, there were a few things that had not come to China yet from India, and so we continued on and we talked all the way through talking about Dengyo, and Dengyo then winning the big debate in Japan amongst the 14 big people. This is also, I'll start a little bit above that. On page 704, the second full paragraph, but now these 14 men abandoned the erroneous doctrines that they had previously held and embraced the teachings of the Lotus Sutra as expounded by Saicho, the great teacher Dengyo. Okay, everybody sees that? Okay, so that's talking about those 14 men that are listed on page 703 in the very first paragraph. They are the eminent priests that were called by Emperor Kamu to have that debate with Dengyo. Okay, they were Zengi, Shoyu, Hoki, Chonin, Kingyoku, Ampuku, Gonso, Shuin, Jiko, Genyo, Saiko, Dosho, Kosho, and Kambin. Okay, so they're the people that he's talking about, the 14 learned men, are all listed there on page 703. Okay, so I'll continue from there. Now these 14 men abandoned the erroneous doctrines that they had previously held and embraced the teachings of the Lotus Sutra as expounded by Saicho, the great teacher Dengyo. Therefore, how could anyone in later times assert that the Flower Garland, Wisdom, or Profound Secret Sutra surpass the Lotus Sutra? These 14 men had, of course, studied the doctrines of the 3 Hinayana schools, establishment of the truth, Dharma analysis, treasury, and precepts. But since the 3 Mahayana schools of Flower Garland, 3 treatises, and Dharma characteristics had suffered a doctrinal defeat, we need hardly mention the Hinayana schools. However, there are some people today who, being unaware of what actually happened, believe that one or another of the 6 schools did not suffer a doctrinal defeat. They all suffered a doctrinal defeat. They are like the blind who cannot see the sun and moon, or the deaf who cannot hear the sound of thunder, and who therefore conclude that there are no sun and moon in the heavens, or that the skies emit no sound. Continuing from last week. Now, okay, with regard to the True Word School, during the reign of the 44th sovereign Empress Gensho, the Tripitaka master Shanmu Wei brought the Mahayana Sutra to Japan, but returned to China without spreading a knowledge of it. Moreover, Gembo and others brought back from China the commentary on the meaning of the Mahayana Sutra in 14 volumes, as did the preceptor Tokusei of Todaiji. These works were studied by the great teacher Dengyo, but he had doubts about what they said concerning the relative worth of Mahayana Sutra and Lotus Sutras. Therefore, in the 7th month of the 23rd year of the Inraku era, 804, he went to China, where he met with Reverend Tao Si of Sui Ming Su Temple and Swing Man of Fo Lung Su Temple, and received the teachings on concentration and insight, which would have been Tentai, right? And the great precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment. He also met the Reverend Shun Chao of Ling Kang Su Temple and received instruction in the True Word teachings. He returned to Japan in the 6th month of the 24th year of Inraku. He was granted an audience with Emperor Kamu, and the emperor thereupon issued an edict instructing the students of the 6 schools to study the teachings on concentration and insight and the true word teachings, and to preserve them in the 7 major temples of Nara. Everybody's with me? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we understand what happened there, right? Mm-hmm. In China, there were various theories concerning the relative superiority of these 2 teachings, concentration and insight, and the true word. Right? Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Okay, so one's Tentai and the other one's not. Moreover, meanings of the Mahavajracana Sutra claims that, though they are equal in terms of principle, the true word is superior in terms of practice. The great teacher Dingyo, however, realized that this was an error on the part of the Tripitaka master Shanwu Wei, and understood that the Mahavajracana Sutra is inferior to the Lotus Sutra. Therefore, he did not establish the true word teachings as an 8th school, but instead incorporated them into the teachings of the 7th school, the Lotus School, thereafter removing from them the label True Word School. Okay, so he qualified them as not being separated. He didn't even say True Word was really a big deal. Okay, he declared that the Mahavajracana Sutra is to be regarded as a supplementary sutra to the Lotus Tendai School, and ranked it along with the Flower Garland, Larger Wisdom, and Nirvana Sutras. However, at the same time, there was much dispute over whether or not a vitally important Mahayana-specific ordination platform of perfect and immediate enlightenment should be established in Japan. Perhaps because of the trouble that arose on this account, it seems that the great teacher Dingyo did not give his disciples clear instructions concerning the relative superiority of the true word and Tendai teachings. In a work called A Clarification of the Schools, based on Tendai's doctrine, however, he clearly states that the true word school stole the correct doctrines of the Lotus Tendai school and incorporated them into its interpretation of the Mahavajracana Sutra, thereafter declaring that the 2 schools were equal in terms of principle. Thus, the true word school had in effect surrendered to the Tendai school. Everybody's with me? Are you? Okay, you understand what's going on, right? Okay, so this is even more evident this is even more evident when we consider that after the death of Shanwu Wei and Qing Kang Chi, both are the true word guys, right? Mm-hmm. And the Tripitaka master Pu Kun went to India, where he had met Bodhisattva Nagabodhi. Nagabodhi informed him that there were no treatises or commentaries in India that made clear the Buddha's intent, but that in China there was a commentary by a man named Tentai that enabled one to distinguish correct from incorrect teachings and to understand the difference between partial doctrines and those that are complete. He exclaimed this in admiration and repeatedly begged that a copy of the work be brought to China. So here, Pu Kung had gone to India to get clarification, and in India they're saying, well, actually, we don't know anymore, but there's a guy in China where you just came from that seems to have it all down. This incident was reported to the great teacher Miao Lo by Pu Kung's disciple Hu Han Kuang, as is recorded at the end of the 10th volume of On Words and Phrases. It is also recorded in Dingyo's clarification of the schools. From this, it is perfectly evident that the great teacher Dingyo believed that the Mahavajracana Sutra to be inferior to the Lotus Sutra. Okay? And it was obviously a great point of confusion because Dingyo is the one that brought the true word teaching into the light of it being accepted by the Tendai Lotus School. Do you understand? He's the one that introduced those mudras into the teachings that had already existed based on the Lotus Sutra. Thus, it becomes apparent that the Thus Come One Shakyamuni and the great teachers Tiantai, Miao and Dingyo were of one mind in regarding the Lotus Sutra as the greatest of all the sutras, including the Mahavajracana Sutra. Moreover, Bodhisattva Nagarjuna, who is regarded as the founder of the True Word School, held the same opinion, as becomes obvious if we carefully examine his treatise on the Great Perfection of Wisdom. Unfortunately, however, Mind aspiring for enlightenment, brought from India by Pukung, is full of errors and has led everyone astray, bringing about the present confusion. Now we come to the disciple of the administrator of priest Gonso of Iwabuki, named Kukai, later known in later ages as the great teacher Kobo. On the 12th day of the 5th month in the 23rd year of Inraku, he set out for China. After arriving there, he met the Reverend Hui Kuo, whose teacher belonged to the third generation of the True Word lineage, beginning with the Tripitaka master Shanmu Wei and Qin Kang Chi. From Hui Kuo, he received the transmission of the two True Word mandalas. He returned to Japan on the 22nd day of the 10th month in the second year of Daido, 807. It was then the reign of Emperor Heizei. Emperor Kamu having passed away a short time before. Kobo was granted an audience with Emperor Heizei, who placed great confidence in him and embraced his teachings, valuing them above all. Not long after, Emperor Heizei ceded the throne to Emperor Saga, with whom Kobo likewise ingratiated himself. The great teacher Dingyo passed away on the 4th day of the 6th month in the 13th year of Konin during the reign of Emperor Saga. From the 14th year of the same era, Kobo served as teacher to the sovereign. He established the True Word School. Now you understand what he just said? He said that the great teacher Dingyo's passed away, right? Mm-hmm. So he didn't introduce True Word as a school. Mm-hmm. He just introduced the teachings of the mudras and so forth that were in the Mahavrachana and said it was supplement to the lotus. It was supplemental to the Tendai teaching, right? Mm-hmm. And now he's saying here, though, that Kobo actually established True Word as a competing school. All right, this is where we get into Inraku-ji, he's going to get into all that. He established the True Word School, from the 14th year of the same era, Kobo served as a teacher to the sovereign. He established the True Word School, was given supervision of the temple known as Toji, and was referred to as a supreme priest of the True Word. Thus the True Word, the 8th school of Buddhism in Japan, had its start after the death of Dengyo. You with me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, because it wasn't separate until then. Mm-hmm. Okay? Kobo commented as follows on the relative merit of the teachings of the Buddha's lifetime. First is the Mahavrachana Sutra of the True Word School. Second is the Flower Garland Sutra. And third are the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras. In comparison to the sutras of the Agama, Correct and Equal, and Wisdom periods, the Lotus is a true sutra. But from the point of view of the Flower Garland and Mahavrachana Sutras, it is a doctrine of childish theory. This is why the Daishonin was so down on Kobo. Okay? This is what he taught everybody. Though, this is still parenthetic, so this is quoting him. Though Shakyamuni was a Buddha, in comparison to the Thus Come One Mahavrachana, he was still in the region of darkness. Now, who's the Thus Come One Mahavrachana? That's the Buddha of True Word teaching. Okay, Vairocana is the Buddha of a Flower Garland. Yeah. Okay, and so he's saying, and Shakyamuni then he's putting behind those two, right? Because he's saying that Kobo's saying that the Lotus is childish theory compared to the Mahavrachana and the Flower Garland Sutras. It's third out of the three, right? Mm-hmm. He's saying, though Shakyamuni was a Buddha, so he's almost qualifying, he was a Buddha, but, right? Though Shakyamuni was a Buddha, in comparison to the Thus Come One Mahavrachana, he was still in the region of darkness. Mahavrachana is as exalted as an emperor. Shakyamuni, by comparison, is as lowly as a subjugated barbarian. Okay? And you understand why the Daishonin was so down on Kobo. The great teacher Tentai is a thief. This is Kobo continuing. He stole the gi of the True Word and claimed that the Lotus Sutra is gi. This guy's like slandering out this wazoo. This is the sort of thing that Kobo wrote. As a result, though people may previously have believed that the Lotus Sutra is the greatest of all sutras after hearing the great teacher after hearing of the great teacher Kobo, they no longer regarded it as worthy of notice. I will set aside the erroneous doctrines propounded by the non-Buddhists in India. Pardon me. But these pronouncements of Kobo are certainly worse than those put forward by the priests of northern and southern China, who declared that, in comparison to the Nirvana Sutra, the Lotus Sutra is a work of distorted views. They go even further than the assertions of the members of the Flower Garland school, who stated that, in comparison to the Flower Garland Sutra, the Lotus Sutra represents the branch teachings. One is reminded of the great arrogant Brahmin of India, who fashioned a tall dais with the deities Manheshvara, Narayana, and Vishnu, along with Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, as the four legs to support it, and then climbed up on it and preached his fallacious doctrines. If only the great teacher Dengyo had still been alive, he would surely have had a word to say on the subject. But how could his disciples Gishin, Incho, Jikaku, and Chisho have failed to question the matter more closely? That was a great misfortune to the world indeed. So, who are those guys that he just mentioned? Who are Gishin, Incho, Jikaku, and Chisho? The followers of Dengyo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of Mount Hei, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the corruption of going from Tendai's teaching to suddenly they became more of a true word leaning temple, and they were constantly at war with Toji, which was Kobo's original temple when Dengyo had Mount Hei separate as a Tendai Lotus, and this was Toji. Okay, so he's saying, if only the great teacher Dengyo had still been alive, he would surely have had a word to say on the subject. But how could his disciples, Dengyo's disciples, Gishin, Incho, Jikaku, and Chisho, have failed to question the matter more closely? That was a great misfortune to the world indeed. Because that was the point in time that, again, the lotus got shunned to the bottom instead of retaining its position at the top. The great teacher Jikaku went to Dang, China. He's saying, how did this all happen? I'll tell you now. The great teacher Jikaku went to Dang, China in the 5th year of Jowa and spent 10 years there studying the doctrines of the Tendai and True Word schools. With regard to the relative merit of the Lotus and Mahavajrana Sutras, he studied under Fa Chuan, Yuan Qing, and others, 8 True Word teachers in all, and was taught by them that, although the Lotus and Mahavajrana Sutras are equal in principle, the latter is superior in terms of practice. He also studied under Qi Yuan, Kuang Sui, and Wei Chuan of the Tendai school, and was taught that the Mahavajrana Sutra belongs to the correct and equal group of sutras that are inferior to the Lotus Sutra. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's saying, on the 10th day of the 9th month of the 13th year of Jowa, he returned to Japan. And on the 14th day of the 6th month of the 1st year of Kasho, an imperial edict was handed down permitting him to conduct the True Word initiation ceremonies. Perhaps because he had difficulty determining the relative merit of the Lotus and Mahavajrana Sutras when he was studying in China, he proceeded to write a 7-volume commentary on the Diamond Crown Sutra and a 7-volume commentary on the Susiddhikara Sutra, making a total of 14 volumes. The gist of these commentaries is that the doctrines set forth in the Mahavajrana, Diamond Crown, and Susiddhikara Sutras, and the doctrines expounded in the Lotus Sutra ultimately indicate the same principle, but because of the ritual use of mudras and mantras associated with the former, the 3 True Word Sutras, which are the Mahavajrana, the Diamond Crown, and the Susiddhi, whatever that Kara Sutra is, okay? Those are the 3 True Word Sutras just mentioned are superior to the Lotus Sutra. In essence, This agrees exactly with the view of Shan Wu Wei, Qing Kang Qi, and Pu Kung set forth in their commentary on the Mahavajrana Sutra. Everybody's with me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the people that have preceded, including Kobo, right? He's saying, but perhaps Jikaku still had doubts in his mind, or perhaps having resolved his own doubts, he wished to clear up the doubts of others. In any event, he placed his 14 volumes of commentary before the object of devotion in the temple where he resided, and made this appeal in prayer. Though I have written these works, the Buddha's intention is very difficult to determine, he said. Are the Mahavajrana Sutra and the other two true word sutras associated with it superior? Or are the Lotus Sutra and the two sutras associated with it to be ranked higher? While he was earnestly praying in this manner, on the 5th day, early in the morning, at the time of the 5th watch, a sign suddenly came to him in a dream. He dreamed that the sun was up in the blue sky and that he took an arrow and shot at it. The arrow flew up into the sky and struck the sun. The sun began to roll over and over, and when it had almost fallen to the earth, Jikaku woke from his dream. Delighted, he said, I have had a very auspicious dream. These writings in which I have declared that the true word sutras are superior to the lotus accord with the Buddha's will, because he had the dream, he thought that was a sign, okay? Mm-hmm. He then requested that an imperial edict be issued to this effect, and he disseminated his teachings throughout the country of Japan. Now here's Jikaku, the disciple of Dengyo, right? Mm-hmm. Who is in the lineage of Dengyo at Mount Hei, right? He's the leader, and he's brought in, and Dengyo had originally discussed or had introduced true word teachings, but had never established them as a school. Now his followers have come back, and they've been influenced by Kobo. Mm-hmm. Okay? And Jikaku now, as a part of the lineage of the Tendai Lotus School at Mount Hei under Dengyo, has now crossed the line. He's now said, well, it's not really the lotus, as Dengyo said. Mm-hmm. It's the Mahavajrana. And then he wrote after he'd gone to China and come back, he had studied all this, he came to these conclusions himself. He wrote this 14 volumes of commentary, and then had the dream and decided, okay, I'm right. All right? Mm-hmm. He says, okay, so the first full paragraph on second column, page 707. But the edict was handed down as a result of this request. But the edict but the edict that was handed down as a result of this request says, in effect, it has at last become known that the concentration and insight doctrines of the Tendai school, which would be Tendai, right? Dengyo is the head of it in Japan, and the doctrines of the True Word school are in principle in perfect agreement. Jikaku had prayed to confirm that the lotus is inferior to the Mahavajrana Sutra, but the edict that was issued says that the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavajrana Sutra are the same, strangely. Okay? The great teacher Shisho, who is the next one after Jikaku, right? In his youth in Japan was a disciple of the Reverend Gishin, the great teacher Insho, the superintendent Kojo, and Jikaku. Thus he received instruction in both the exoteric, the visible, and the esoteric doctrines as they were taught in Japan at the same time. The esoteric, the doctrines are the ones that are the true word, right? Exoteric are known, esoteric is secret. But presumably, because he was in doubt as to the relative superiority of the Tendai and True Word schools, he journeyed to China himself. He arrived in Dai China in the second year of Ninju, where he studied under the True Word priests Fa Chuan and Yuan Chen. In general, their teachings accorded with the view held by Jikaku, namely that the Mahavajrana Sutra and the Lotus Sutra are equal in terms of principle, but that the former is superior in terms of practice. Shisho also studied under the Reverend Liang Si, of the Tendai school, who taught him that, with regard to the relative merit of the True Word in Tendai schools, the Mahavajrana Sutra of the True Word school cannot compare to the Flower Garland and Lotus Sutras. After spending 7 years in China, Chisho returned to Japan on the 17th day of the 5th month in the first year of Jogan. In his Essentials of the Mahavajrana Sutra, Chisho states, even the Lotus Sutra cannot compare to the Mahavajrana Sutra, much less the other doctrines. In his work, therefore, he argues that the Lotus Sutra is inferior to the Mahavajrana Sutra. On the other hand, in another work, a collection of orally transmitted teachings, he states that the True Word, Zen, and other doctrines, when compared with the Flower Garland, Lotus, and Nirvana Sutras, can at best serve as an introduction to these sutras. So he's in conflict with what he wrote. Can best serve as an introduction to these sutras. And he repeats the same view, so twice he says that, in his commentary on the Universal Worthy Sutra and commentary on the treatise on the Lotus Sutra. On the 29th day, the day of the cyclical sign of Mizunoe Saru, of the 4th month of the 8th year of Jogan, 866, the year of Hino Inu, an imperial edict was handed down that stated, we have heard that the two schools, True Word and Tendai, and their teachings are both worthy to be called the Gi of Buddhism and to be described as profound and recondite. Again, on the 3rd day of the 6th month, an edict proclaimed, ever since the great teacher in former times, Dengyo, established the two disciplines, True Word and Lotus, right? As a proper way for the Tendai school, the successive heads of the school in generation after generation have all followed this practice and transmitted both types of doctrines. Why, then, should their successors in latter times depart from this old and established tradition? Okay, so the edict was, don't reject Tendai, don't reject True Word. The tradition has always been from Dengyo on that both were practiced together. Why all of a sudden you have to separate one as being superior and one being inferior? All right? And yet, we hear the priests of Mount Hei do nothing but turn against the teachings of the patriarch, Dengyo, and instead follow the prejudices and inclinations of their own hearts. It would appear that they give themselves almost entirely to promulgating the doctrines of the other schools and make no attempt to restore the old doctrines of the Tendai school. On the path inherited from the master, one cannot neglect either the concentration and insight or True Word teachings. In diligently transmitting and spreading the doctrine, must one not be proficient in both types of teachings? From now on, only a person who is thoroughly familiar with both teachings shall be appointed as head of the Tendai school of Enrakuji, and this shall become a regular practice for future times. So do you understand what just happened there? What did I just read? What I was just reading was an imperial edict. Now what's that? That's a ruling from the emperor qualifying what the law of the land is. Okay, it's not debatable among priests once the emperor says, no, we're going to do it this way. And what's been occurring is that there's been this disruption of the teaching that had been established by Dengyo, which said that True Word was not a true school, and that it was inferior to the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras and the teaching of Tendai of China, right? Dengyo stated this, okay? But because he had gone to China and brought back the True Word teachings, even though he didn't establish them as a school, but he just said there are things in there that make sense, that are correct. He said they're both equal, okay? Then in his absence, after him, Kobo had this influence. Kobo was doing this whole thing at Toji Temple, which is also on Mount Hei, down the mountain. Don't forget, in Rakuji and Toji, whatever, Todaiji, I think it became known as. They ended up becoming like they were constantly at war. I mean, like war, like hurt you, kill you war. Okay, so the emperors basically comes down and says, enough of all of this qualification stuff. This isn't the way the Dengyo said it. So from now on, I don't want any more arguments. You're going to do both. It's not about which one is inferior or superior, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so these two men. So now I continue. Page 708, second column. Mm-hmm. These two men, Jikaku and Shisho, as we have seen, were disciples of Dengyo and Gishin. Okay, now Gishin still had it right. Okay, Gishin had not been, it starts with Jikaku and Shisho, this migration over to true word, the secret ship. They like that, right? And in addition, they journeyed, these two men, Jikaku and Shisho, as we have seen, were disciples of Dengyo and Gishin, and in addition, they journeyed to China and met eminent teachers of the Tendai and True Word schools there. And yet it appears that they could not make up their minds as to the relative merit of these two schools. Sometimes they declared that the true word is superior, sometimes that the lotus is superior, and sometimes they said that the two are equal in terms of principle, but that the true word is superior in terms of practice. Meanwhile, an edict warned that anyone attempting to argue the relative merit of the two schools would be judged guilty of violating the imperial decree. So the emperor says, I don't want to see this consternation going on. Okay, so shut it down. Do what Dengyo did. All right, so he says, these pronouncements of Jikaku and Shisho were clearly inconsistent. And it would appear that the followers of the other schools placed no trust in them whatsoever. Nevertheless, an imperial edict, as we have seen, states that the two schools are equal, putting this forward as the doctrine of the Tendai patriarch, the great teacher Dengyo, even though that isn't what he did. All right? But in what work, because he didn't even qualify it as a school, true word is school, right? Mm-hmm. He says, but in what work of the great teacher Dengyo is this view to be found? This is something that must be looked into carefully. And Nichiren is saying, because I looked everywhere and I can't find it. For me, Nichiren, to be challenging Jikaku and Shisho because of doubts over a matter pertaining to the great teacher Dengyo is like a person confronting his parents and arguing with them over who is older, or a person confronting the god of the sun and the moon, or the sun, and claiming that his own eyes shine more brilliantly. Nevertheless, those who would defend the views of Jikaku and Shisho must produce some sort of clear scriptural evidence to support their case. Only if they do so can they hope to gain credence for such views. So did you understand what he just said there? Mm-hmm. He says, I'm writing this letter and nobody knows me like everybody knows Jikaku and Shisho. I mean, these are famous historical priests of the Tendai True Word School, right? Mm-hmm. He's saying, and it may seem like for me to say that those two were wrong is out of place, but and so I won't. But nonetheless, if they're going to say things like that, I need to see where they said it. All right? So he says, the Tripitaka master, Xuanzang, had been in India and seen a copy of the great commentary on the Abhidharma there, but that did not prevent him from being criticized by the Dharma teacher Fa Pao, who had never been to India. Now he's going to justify how, even though he hasn't done all this stuff that they have, he hasn't been to India, he hasn't been to China, talking about Nichiren. Mm-hmm. He's saying, I don't have to be to know what I know. He says, the Tripitaka master Xuanzang had been to China and seen a copy of the great commentary on the Abhidharma there, but that did not prevent him from being criticized by the Dharma teacher Fa Pao, who had never been to India. The Tripitaka master Dhammaarksha saw a copy of the Lotus Sutra in India, but that did not prevent a man from China from pointing out that the entrustment chapter was out of place in the translation he had made of it, though the man had never seen the original text. Okay? In a like manner. That's what the Daishonin is trying to qualify. I'm not doing something no one else has ever done by taking issue with this. He says, in like manner, though Jikaku may have studied under the great teacher Dengyo and received instruction from him, and though Shisho may have obtained the oral transmission from the Reverend Gishin, if they go against the teachings recorded in the authentic writings of Dengyo and Gishin, then how can they help but incur suspicion? Clarification of the schools by the great teacher Dingyo is the most secret of his writings. In the preface to that work, he writes, "The true word school of Buddhism that has recently been brought to Japan deliberately obscures how its transmission was falsified in the recordings by I Ching, who was deceived by Shan Wei, while the flower garland school that was introduced earlier attempts to disguise the fact that it was influenced by the doctrines of Tendai." Don't forget, right? The flower garland school stole the gi of Ichinen Sanzen, incorporated it into the flower garland school's teaching, and the same thing had occurred in the true word teaching. The three treatises school, which is so infatuated with the concept of emptiness, has forgotten Chia Xuang's humiliation and conceals the fact that he was completely won over to the Tendai teachings by Chang'an. The Dharma characteristics school, which clings to the concept of being, denies that its leader, Chi Chao, was converted to the teachings of the Tendai school, and that Ling Pi used those teachings in interpreting the Benevolent King Sutra. Now, with all due circumspection, I have written clarification of the schools in one volume to present to wise men of later times who share my convictions. The time is the reign of the 52nd sovereign of Japan, the 7th year of the Konin era, the year Hino e Saru, and finish the quotation marks. So what was I just reading there? Who wrote what I was just reading there? You can go back just like I just did. It's like it's right there. Clarification of the schools by the great teacher Dingyo is his most important, his most secret of writings. Yet in the preface to that work, he blows all this other crap away. That's what Nichiren's saying. He's saying, where did he say this stuff about true word superior? You guys, Chisho and Chikaku, you guys are saying that you're making these declaratives. Where did he say that? Now, it might seem like I'm out of place as just lowly Nichiren, never been to China, never been to India. You guys are all that in a bag of chips. But where did Dingyo ever say what you're saying is the truth? Okay? And that's what he's throwing back at them. That you may look at me and say, I'm not qualified to say it. But then tell me where he did say it then. If I'm not qualified to take issue, tell me where what you're saying he said is said. I can show you where he said things that are in complete opposition to that point. Even though I've never been to India, even though I've never been to China. Okay, do you understand his point? It has nothing to do with anything. He's saying, so again, he's reading all of this stuff from Dingyo in clarification of the schools, okay? Farther on, in the main text of the same work, it reads, there was an eminent monk in India who had heard that the teachings of the priest Tiantai of Tang China were most suitable for distinguishing correct from incorrect doctrines and expressed a longing to become better acquainted with them. We already heard that anecdote from Chisho, right? Or from Chikaku's trip. It continues, does this not mean that Buddhism has been lost in India? If they're looking to China to clarify the teachings of Shakyamuni, then he's saying, does this not mean that Buddhism has been lost in India, the country of its origin, and must now be sought in the surrounding regions? But even in China, there are few people who recognize the greatness of Tiantai's teachings, who was Chinese, right? They are like the people of Lu. This work, as may be seen from these quotations, this work by Dingyo, called Clarification of the Schools, criticizes the Dharma characteristics, three treatises, flower garland, and true word schools. Now, if the great teacher Dingyo believed that the Tendai and true word schools are of equal worth, then why would he criticize the latter? Furthermore, he compares the Tripitaka master Pukung and others to the ignorant people of the state of Lu. If he really approved of the true word teachings as formulated by Shanwo Wei, Shinkang Chi, and Pukung, then why would he speak ill of these men by comparing them to the people of Lu, who evidently were as dumb as rocks? And if the true word teachings of India were identical with or superior to the teachings of the Tendai school, then why did the eminent monk of India question Pukung about them and say that the correct teaching had been lost in India? These are all very logical, but you have to have read everything to be able to know to say the stuff that Nichiren is saying. Be that as it may, these two men, Jikaku and Chisho, in words claimed to be the disciples of the great teacher Dingyo, but at heart they were not. That is why Dingyo wrote in the preface to his work, "Now, with all due circumspection, I have written clarification of the schools in one volume to present to wise men of later times who share my convictions." The words "who share my convictions" mean, in effect, those who share my conviction that the True Word School is inferior to the Tendai school. In the edict quoted earlier, which Chisho himself had requested, it says that they do nothing but turn against the teachings of the patriarch, Dingyo, and instead follow the prejudices and inclinations of their own hearts. It also states, on the path inherited from the master, one cannot neglect either the concentration and insight or the true word teachings. But if we are to accept the words of the edict, we would have to say that Jikaku and Chisho themselves are the ones who have turned against their teacher Dingyo. It may be impertinent that I make these charges. It may be impertinent that I make charges of this kind, Nichiren. But if I do not do so, then the relative merit of the Mahevajana and Lotus Sutras will continue to be misunderstood as it is at present. That is why I risk my life to bring these charges and write this teaching. Since they themselves were mistaken, and this is like saying, like, these are everybody looks up to these people, and yet, you know, it's just like Dingyo or Tentai did the same thing. Dingyo did the same thing. Since they themselves were mistaken, it is altogether natural that these two men, Jikaku and Chisho, did not venture to accuse the great teacher Kobo of doctrinal error. Instead of wasting all those supplies and making work for other people by insisting upon traveling all the way to China, they should have made a more careful and thorough study of the doctrines of the great teacher Dingyo, who was their own teacher. It was only in the time of the first three leaders of the Tendai school, the great teacher Dingyo, the Reverend Gishin, and the great teacher Insho, that the correct doctrine was taught on Mount Hei. Thereafter, the chief priests of the Tendai school were transformed into true word leaders. The area continued to be called Tendai Mountain, but was presided over by a true word master. Does everybody understand this now? Do you? Everybody's with me, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're in Japan. Yeah. All right. The great teachers, Jikaku and Chisho, as we have seen, contradict the passage in the Lotus Sutra concerning all the sutras that the Buddha has preached, now preaches, and will preach. And having contradicted that passage of the scripture, are they not to be regarded as the arch enemies of Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, who all said that is the case, and had their tongues go up to the Brahma heaven and say, don't ever anybody question this, this is the way it is? So he's saying they're arch enemies because they're adding confusion, and they're going against the actual teachings of the Buddha, and many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, who came to say Shakyamuni was laying it right in the lotus, right? Everybody's with me? Mm. Okay. Okay. Are they not to be regarded as arch enemies of Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions? One might have thought that the great teacher Kobo was the foremost slanderer of the law, but Jikaku and Chisho taught errors that far surpass those of Kobo. Why? Kobo wasn't part of this thing with Dingyo, right? Mm-hmm. Kobo just came over. He was doing his own thing. He was true word from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Jikaku and Chisho assimilated the true word teachings and then declared them superior to the teaching of the founder of their own school, Dengyo. This is why, that's why the Daishonin is so incredulously pissed off. This is anybody that would read would know this. Anybody that was objective in their attempt to study would know this. He's getting it all from existing historical doctrine. He's not making this up. He's not turning on the television. This is all written in writings, right? Okay. When an error is as far from the truth as water is from fire or the earth from the sky, people will refuse to believe it, and such errors will have no chance of acceptance. Thus, for example, the doctrines of the great teacher Kobo are so full of such errors that even his own disciples would not accept them. Okay? As far as the practices and ceremonies of the school, they accepted his instructions, but they could not bring themselves to accept his doctrines concerning the relative merits of the sutras. Therefore, they substituted for them the doctrines of Shanwu-wei, Chinkang-chi, Pu-kung, Jikaku, and Chisho. It is the doctrine of Jikaku and Chisho that declares that the true word in Tendai schools to be identical in principle, and all the people have accepted that declaration. So he's saying if this had never gone any farther than Kobo, true word the confusion would not be there. It's the leaders of the disciples of Dengyo that actually created the problem with true word. All right? Recognizing this situation, even followers of the Tendai school, hoping to be asked to perform the eye-opening ceremony for the consecration of painted or wooden Buddhist images, adopt the mudras and mantras in which the true word school is believed to excel, thus crossing a line of becoming slanderers themselves. Do you understand? He says, recognize even followers of the Tendai school, which should be in correct association with the true teaching, right? Hoping to be asked to perform the eye-opening ceremony, because you got to have all the secret shit to do the secret stuff, right? To show that power. Okay. Recognize the situation, even followers of the Tendai school, hoping to be asked to perform the eye-opening ceremony for the consecration of painted or wooden Buddhist images, adopt mudras and mantras in which the true word school is believed to excel. Thus, in effect, the whole of Japan goes over to the true word school, and the Tendai school is left without a single follower. A monk and a nun, a black object and a dark object, are so easily confused that a person with poor eyesight might well mistake one for the other. But a priest and a layman, or a white object and a red object, even a person with poor eyesight would never confuse, much less someone with good eyes. Now the doctrines, I love this guy, don't you? I love the way he writes. Now the doctrines of Jikaku and Chisho are as easy to mistake for the truth as a monk is for a nun, or a black object for a dark blue one. Therefore, even wise men are led astray, and the ignorant fall into error. As a result, for the past 400 and more years, on Mount Hei, on Onjoji, and Toji, in Nara, the 5 provinces surrounding the capital, the 7 outlying regions, and indeed throughout the whole land of Japan, all the people have been turned into slanderers of the law. In the 5th volume of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha states, Manjushri, this Lotus Sutra is the secret storehouse of the Buddhas, the thus come ones. Among the sutras, it holds the highest place. If this passage of the scripture is to be believed, then the Lotus Sutra must represent the correct teaching that dwells supreme above the Mahavajrana and all the numerous other sutras. How then, one wonders, would Shanwu-wei, Shinkan-chi, Pu-kung, Kobo, Jikaku, and Chisho interpret this passage in this sutra and reconcile it with their beliefs? Again, the 7th volume of the Lotus Sutra states, a person who can accept and uphold this sutra is likewise foremost among all living beings. If this passage of the sutra is to be believed, then the votary of the Lotus Sutra must be like the great sea as compared to the various rivers and streams, like Mount Sumeru, among the host of mountains, like the god of the moon amid the multitude of stars, like the god of the sun amid the other shining lights, like the wheel-turning kings, like the Lord Chakra, like the great king Brahma among all various kings. The great teacher Dingyo, in his work entitled The Outstanding Principles of the Lotus Sutra, writes, "This sutra, likewise, is foremost among all sutra teachings." He's talking about the lotus. "A person who can accept and uphold this sutra is likewise foremost among all living beings." Now, why does the Daishonin put that up in there? Because that's me. That's me. He's basically saying, just follow what the scriptures say. You'll know who I am. You'll know what I'm doing. After quoting this passage from the Lotus Sutra, Dingyo notes a passage from the work entitled The Profound Meaning of the Lotus Sutra by Tentai that interprets the same passage of Scripture and explains its meaning as follows. One should understand that the sutras on which the other schools base their teachings are not foremost among the sutras, and those people who can uphold such sutras are not foremost among the multitude. But the Lotus Sutra, which is upheld by the Tendai Lotus School, is the foremost of all the sutras, and therefore those who can uphold the lotus are foremost among living beings. This is borne out by the words of the Buddha himself. How can it be mere self-praise? Later in the work just mentioned, Dingyo says, detailed explanations concerning the various schools based their teachings upon the Tentai school are given in a separate work. Clarification of the schools referred to as a separate work states, now the founder of our school, the great teacher Tentai, preached the Lotus Sutra and interpreted the Lotus Sutra in a way that placed him far above the crowd. In all of China, he stood alone. One should clearly understand that he was a messenger of the Thus Come One. Those who praise him will receive blessings that will pile up as high as Mount Calm and Bright, while those who slander him will be committing a fault that will condemn them to the hell of incessant suffering. Go, Dingyo. If we go by the Lotus Sutra and the interpretations of it put forward by Tentai, Myolo, and Dingyo, then in Japan, at the time present, there is not a single votary of the Lotus Sutra. In India, when Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, was preaching the Lotus Sutra as described in the Treasure Tower chapter, he summoned all the various Buddhas and had them take their seats upon the ground. Only the Thus Come One Mahavrachana was seated within the Treasure Tower on the lower seat to the south, while Shakyamuni Buddha was seated on the upper seat to the north. Thus Come One Mahavrachana is Thus Come One Mahavrachana is the master of the Mahavrachana of the womb realm described in the Mahavrachana Sutra and of the Mahavrachana of the diamond realm described in the Diamond Crown Sutra. This Mahavrachana, or many treasures, Buddha. This Mahavrachana, or many treasures, Buddha, who has as his vassals the Thus Come One's Mahavrachana of the two realms just mentioned, is in turn surpassed by Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, who sits in the seat above him in the Treasure Tower at the ceremony in the air. Okay? This Shakyamuni Buddha is a true practitioner of the Lotus Sutra. Such was the situation in India. In China, in the time of the Qin Emperor Su Pao, the great teacher Tentai defeated in debate the Buddhist leaders of northern and southern China and was honored with the title of great teacher while still alive. As Dingyo says of him, he was far above the crowd. In all of China, he stood alone. In Japan, the great teacher Dingyo defeated in debate the leaders of the 6 schools and became the country's first and foremost great teacher Kompon. In India, China, and Japan, these 3 persons alone, Shakyamuni, Tentai, and Dingyo, were what the Lotus Sutra calls foremost among all living beings. Thus, Outstanding Principle states Shakyamuni taught that the shallow is easy to embrace, but the profound is difficult. To discard the shallow and to seek the profound is the way of a person of courage. The great teacher Tentai trusted and obeyed Shakyamuni and worked to uphold the Lotus School, spreading its teachings throughout China, We of Mount Hei inherited the doctrine from Tentai and work to uphold the Lotus School and to disseminate its teachings throughout Japan. In the 1800 years or more since the passing of the Buddha, there has only been one votary of the Lotus Sutra in China and one in Japan. And if Shakyamuni Buddha himself is added to the number, that makes a total of 3 persons. The secular classics of China claim that a sage will appear. He's kind of like... In the secular classics of China, claim that a sage will appear once every 1,000 years and a worthy once every 500. In the Yellow River, where the Qing and Hui rivers flow into it, the flow of the 2 tributary rivers remains separate. But it is said that once every 500 years, one side of the river will flow clear, and once every 1,000 years, both sides of the river will flow clear. In the same way, sages and worthies appear at fixed intervals. In Japan, as we have seen, only on Mount Hei, in the time of the great teacher Dengyo, was there a votary of the Lotus Sutra, Dengyo himself. Dengyo was succeeded by Gishin and Incho, the first and second chief priests of the school, respectively, but only the first chief priest Gishin followed the ways of the great teacher Dengyo. The second chief priest Incho was half a disciple of Dengyo and half a disciple of Kobo. The third chief priest, the great teacher Jikaku, at first acted like a disciple of the great teacher Dengyo, but after he went to China at the age of 40, though he continued to call himself a disciple of Dengyo, he went through the motions of carrying on Dengyo's line. He taught a kind of Buddhism that is wholly unworthy of a true disciple of Dengyo. Only in the matter of the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment established by Dengyo did he conduct himself like a true disciple. He was like a bat. For a bat resembles a bird, yet it is not a bird, and resembles a mouse, yet it is not a mouse. Or he was like an owl or a haki beast. He ate his father, the Lotus Sutra, and devoured his mother, those who embraced the Lotus Sutra. When he dreamed that he shot down the sun, it must have been a portent of these crimes, and it must have been because of these acts that, after his death, no grave was set aside for him. The temple Anjo-ji, representing Chisho's branch of the Tendai school, fought incessantly with the temple in Rakuji on Mount Hei, which represented Jikaku's branch of the school, and the two going at each other like so many asuras and evil dragons. First, Anjo-ji was burned down. Then the buildings on Mount Hei, because they just burned each other down, right? Mm-hmm. As a result, the image of Bodhisattva Maitreya that had been the special object of devotion of the great teacher Chisho was burned, and the special object of devotion of the great teacher Jikaku, as well as the great lecture hall on Mount Hei, was likewise burned. The priests of the 2 temples must have felt as though they had fallen into the hell of incessant suffering while they were still in this world. Only the main hall on Mount Hei remained standing. The lineage of the great teacher Kobo has likewise ceased to be what it should have been. Kobo left written instructions that no one who had not received the precepts at the ordination platform established by Gishin at the Todaiji should be allowed to become head of Toji Temple. The Reverend Emperor Kampyo, however, founded a temple in Kyoto called Ninaji and moved a number of priests from Toji to staff it, and also issued a decree clearly stating that no one should be allowed to reside in Ninaji unless he had received the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment at the ordination platform at Mount Hei. As a result, the priests of Toji are neither the disciples of Ganji nor those of Kobo. In terms of the precepts, they are Dengyo's disciples. However, they did not behave like the true disciples of Dengyo. They turned their backs on the Lotus Sutra, which Dengyo considered to be supreme. So you say, guys, they got this thing all screwed up, and then they screwed it up more, and then they screwed it up some more. Kobo died on the 21st day of the 3rd month of the 2nd year of the Jowa era, and the imperial court sent a representative to offer prayers at his funeral. Later, however, his disciples gathered together and, bent on deception, announced that he had not died at all, but had entered a deep state of meditation, a state of deep meditation. And some of them even claimed that they had had to shave his head because his hair had grown long. Others asserted that while he was in China, he had hurled a 3-pronged diamond pounder all the way across the ocean to Japan. Remember, I told you that story. And that in answer to his prayers, the sun had come out in the middle of the night, that he had transformed himself into the thus come one Mahavajana, or that he had instructed the great teacher Dingyo in the 18 paths of esoteric Buddhism. Thus, by enumerating their teacher's supposed virtues and powers, they hoped to make him appear wise. In this way, lending support to his false doctrines and deluding the ruler and ministers. Okay, so that's Kobo, right? He was a mess. In addition, on Mount Koya, there are 2 main temples. The original temple and Dimboin Temple. The original temple, which includes the Great Pagoda, was founded by Kobo and is dedicated to the thus come one Mahavajana of the womb realm. The temple called Dimboin was founded by Shokakubo and is dedicated to the Mahavajana of the diamond realm. These 2 temples fight with each other day and night in the same way that Onjoji at the foot of Mount Hei and Inrakuji on the top of Mount Hei. Was it the accumulation of deceit that brought about the appearance of Japan of these calamities? You may pile up. This is the end. Oh, I love this. I love this. This is why I love this guy so much, because he thinks the way I do. You may pile up dung and call it sandalwood, but when you burn it, it will still only give off the odor of dung. You may pile up lots of lies and call them the teachings of the Buddha, but they will never be anything but a gateway to the great citadel of the hell of incessant suffering. I'm trying to hear it. I'm only reading to there. Okay. The stupa built by Nirgrantha. This is obviously an Indian dude. Jantalaputra, over a period of several years, conferred great benefit upon living beings, but when Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha bowed to it, it suddenly collapsed. The Brahmin, demon eloquence, taught from behind a curtain and for a number of years succeeded in fooling others, but Bodhisattva Ashvaghosha berated him and exposed his falsehoods. The non-Buddhist teacher Uluka turned himself into a stone and remained in that form for 800 years. But when Bodhisattva Dignaga berated him, he turned into water. The Taoist priests for several hundred years deceived the people of China, but when they were rebuked by the Buddhist monks Kashayapa Matanaga and Chu Falan, they burned their own scriptures and purported to teach the way of the immortals. Just as Chao Kuo seized control of the country and Wang Mang usurped the position of emperor, so the leaders of the True Word School deprived the Lotus Sutra of the rank it deserves and declared that its domain belongs instead to the Mahavajana Sutra. If the monarch of the law has been deprived of his kingdom in this manner, can the monarch of the people hope to remain peaceful and unharmed? Japan today is filled with followers of Jikaku, Chisho, and Kobo. There is not a single person who is not a slanderer of the law. If we stop to consider the situation, it is very much like what prevailed in the latter day of the law of the great Buddha, of the Buddha Great Adornment, or the latter day of the law of the Buddha All-Bright King. In the latter day of the law of the Buddha Awesome Sound King, even though people repented of their wrongdoings, they still had to suffer for 1,000 kalpas in the Avicii hell. What then of the situation today? The true word teachers, the followers of the Zen school, and the priests of the Nimbutsu show not the slightest sign of repentance in their hearts. Can there be any doubt that, as the Lotus Sutra says, that they will keep repeating this cycle for a countless number of kalpas? Because Japan is a country where the correct teaching is slandered, heaven has abandoned it. And because heaven has abandoned it, the various benevolent deities who in the past guarded and protected the nation have burned their shrines and returned to the capital of tranquil life. Now there is only I, Nichiren, who remain behind, announcing and giving warnings of these things. But when I do so, the rulers of the nation treat me like an enemy. People by the hundreds curse me and speak ill of me, attack me with staves and sticks, swords and knives. Door after door is closed to me, house after house drives me away. And when the authorities find that even such treatment does not stop me, they intervene in the matter. Twice they sent me into exile, and once on the 12th day of the 9th month of the 8th year of Brine, they very nearly cut off my head. The Sovereign King Sutra says, because evil people are respected and favored and good people are subjected to punishment, marauders will appear from other regions and the people of the country will meet with death and disorder. The Great Collection Sutra states there may perhaps be various kings of the Kshatriya class who act in a way contrary to the law, causing anguish to the voice-hearer disciples of the world-honored one. Perhaps they may curse and revile them, or beat and injure them with swords and staves, or deprive them of their robes and begging bowls or other things they need. Or perhaps they may restrain and persecute those who give alms to the disciples. If there should be those who do such things, then we will see to it that their enemies in foreign lands rise up suddenly of their own accord and march against them, and we will cause uprisings to break out within their states. We will bring about pestilence and famine, unseasonable winds and rains and contention, wrangling and slander, and we will make certain that those rulers do not last for long, but that their nations are brought to destruction. As these passages from the sutras indicate, if I, Nichiren, were not here in Japan, then one might suppose that the Buddha was a teller of great lies for making such predictions, and that he could not escape falling into the Avicii hell. But I am here, and I'll keep reading from there next. On page 715.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Was that clear enough?
Yes.
Did everybody followed what was going on there? And right? Nobody got confused? It's not that confusing. It's just a bunch of names of people you don't really need to remember.
No, they were wrong anyway.
And they were wrong, and so all we're doing is clarifying they were wrong, so screw them. We're never going to think about them again.
So